Well, good afternoon and good morning to all of you from beautiful Greater Boston. I have my friends here from the West Coast. My name is Christine George, and I am your host of the No Like Trust podcast, as well as the co-founder of Post and Beam Creative. And today, I am super excited to have Deborah Trapin back on the show in part 3 of our series on WomanUP, the movement that started with the California Association of Realtors. Joining me and Deborah today is Cathy Scharetg. Cathy is part of the WomanUP movement and will be at the retreat in June in just a couple of weeks. So I can't wait to dig into that. But before we do, just a little bit about Cathy. First, she's incredibly talented and she wears many hats. And we had a prep call, I think it was last week, and we could have spoken for probably 5 or 6 hours. She has over 25 years of experience in the real estate space. She's the VP of operations of an independent brokerage in San Francisco. She is also a director at CAR and SFAR. And she has managed and led successful teams and offices in San Francisco, and personally sold over 275 properties over the course of her career, which is like, wow. But she's also a coach, incredibly insightful. And the most cool thing about Cathy, I think, is that she's a TEDx presenter. So super excited to have you on the show today. Welcome back, Deborah, and welcome, Cathy.
Thank you. It's what a pleasure to be here with both of you. How exciting. How very exciting.
It is very exciting.
Hanging out with Christine is one of my favorite things. And so whenever she invites me to come co-host or hang out, I'm like, yes, it's always a holy hell yes. Right, Cathy?
Yes.
Yeah.
So as Christine kind of mentioned at the beginning, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Deborah Trapin. Today I'm wearing my co-creator of WomanUP hat. And I want the world to understand your flow inside the community, Cathy. Like you have, I feel like WomanUP has a great analogy to church when it comes to you. It's like you kind of walked in the room and you sat down at a table, right? You sat in your pew and then you raised your hand and you were on the show. And then from the show, you were on the stage. And then from the stage, you became a wave maker and a sponsor. And it's like, oh my gosh, you have really had a beautiful journey inside the WomanUP experience. And I'd love to hear like how that started and what inspired you to raise your hand and level up over the years.
Well, I would have to say the start began when there was a clearing in the forest. And I say that on the initial basis for me, when things in my life were able to like be calm in a situation, in a brand new situation. I had found myself 20 years in the business looking for what's going to be next. And rather than being in my head, I just let my heart settle a little bit with things are going to be different now. At the same time, the world was changing. The world was really changing. Even pre-COVID, there was a huge awakening to the underutilized power and presence of women. And I don't mean just in real estate. I think that there was an underutilization of that. And so I started noticing throughout all of the world where women were showing up, but just not being present to what could be possible, because we thought the hard part was showing up. We thought the hard part was getting the degree or getting the license or getting the kids ready before we walked out the door. So we had overcome so many hurdles to be present in an arena of public display that we were kind of thinking, okay, now let's do what's next. And what's next was sometimes handed to us. Like, here, do this. Here's an opportunity. Now, I know this is a terrible generalization, but women were earning the right into the room, but not necessarily speaking up for what could be different, because we were still kind of committed to investing in the status quo. And this was maybe 10 years ago. Now I started to see that women were waking up and they were saying, okay, now that I'm here, I want to do things a little differently. I want to be a part of it. When you and Leslie and Sarah did the WomanUP, I was I had just bought a couple of tea rooms. And so I was working in the restaurant business and selling real estate. It was a renaissance period in my life. But what I understood when I got into the tea room business was I started seeing the power of women. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to be 65 this year. When I was growing up in business, I was supposed to be male-like. I was supposed to be a lighter version of John Wayne. Cute, but not too attractive, in the room, but don't bring too much attention to yourself. Be more like a man than you are like yourself. And then you'll get things done. That's how we get things done. So when I got into the tea room business, I really started seeing the softer and the stronger side of women, of what it is to be a strong woman, not to be a lighter version of a man, but what is it to be a strong woman? And the merging started happening. I hope that wasn't too.
No, I think that's great. I think the interesting thing, and I know you and I have had many conversations about like the spiritual awakening in the divine feminine, whether that shows up in a woman's body or a male body, does not matter. That is rising, and the pandemic kind of really highlighted that for sure. What I hear when you're saying this is that the rising of women wasn't overnight, right? It's been a gradual shift for us, right? Take another little baby step, because real estate is a great example of this. It's a male designed industry. Men started the real estate industry, the structure of it, the licensing, in order to do this, you must do this first, the structure and order of things. But it's a very female dominated space. So male designed, female dominated. Now tea is the opposite. There are some cultures where men are very into the tea service of things, but usually it is a very female designed and dominated space. And I think that there's so much for us to slow down with around that, right? Tea is about slowing down. Yeah. Tea is about, the brewing or even just the choosing of the botanicals that go into the water, and the water being the right temperature and in the water long enough, and just the waiting and the being as it's happening versus the doing of corporate or the doing of real estate, the being that's woven into tea. And I think we're all craving that more and more. And maybe it's because we're getting older, but I feel like the younger generations are too. Don't you, ladies?
It's funny. I never really drew the analogy to tea and the evolution that I went through. And it was more of an evolution than a revolution. I know that many people have their own version of coming into their true power, but for me, it was an evolving. And one of the things was, I used to think the feminine aspect of my personality was the weaker side. Mm-hmm. Let's just kind of pause on that. And it was reinforced socially. So I had dominated the masculine side of all of my traits to get along, to get by, to get in the club. And that was the number one thing, to check the box and pass the test. And in so diminishing the feminine aspects that were within me, but yet not as valued by me. So I really wasn't a victim of the world as much as I was limiting my own powers, limiting my own design based on what I thought was going to be socially acceptable.
Cathy, I have a question on that for you. And that is, so much of what you're talking about, and I think for Deborah and I as Gen Xers, we grew up in that same way where, go to work, be cute, but not too cute, show up, but don't be too loud, only speak when when asked, and so on and so forth. It's taught to us so subliminally, right, from infanthood, and not in a ill-intended way, just because that's the way it is. And how do we, and I see it even in younger girls. I know I'm struggling to get this out, right? Like, how do we even become, I mean, I'm 52 years old, and it's only in the last, I mean, I think it's been a seed throughout my adult life, but it's only in the last probably 5 years where I have really started to acknowledge and become aware of my femininity and the beautiful thing that it is and what it can bring to any situation, whether it's personal or professional. How do we inspire the younger generation to actually understand that it exists, acknowledge it, and embrace it?
I think that the first thing is that leading by example, and not once we wake up, once I woke up to the fullness of the life within me, not just the constant teeter-totter of trying to negotiate which part of me is going to show up, but to show up in the fullness of who I am, and the fallibility of it too, as well. That there needs to be that invitation. Now, I don't think it just has to do with younger women and all of that other thing. We're also dealing with the personification of perfection on social media. So it's like, who's going to show up with their full self when you can edit yourself and make that call? And so there's and I have no problem with that, because I do editing too. I don't want everything. If I'm trying to sell something, I don't want it all up there that, so I edit as well. And I also know that there's a points where genuine interaction is the world is thirsting for authentic,
yes,
genuine interaction. And I did a talk yesterday for my association. I did it on, I was a keynote speaker for our sales rally. And there were things that I thought at the end of it, my son filmed me, and I thought, oh, and I looked at the film and I thought, oh, I meant to say this instead of that. And I should have done this, and I had this version of myself. But 4 women came up to me afterwards and said, can I have your number? Can I call you? So I got up there and I had my time, and I touched the hearts of the minds that needed to be touched by me that day. So I think that we kind of, I said it once, and Leslie and I have talked about it. Sometimes we put our own glass ceiling on ourselves through too much of that edification that we do upon ourselves before we go out into the world and play. I think that we need to go out in the world and play who we are, how we are in the right time and space. Yeah. And let that be an invitation.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, though, ladies, is because of how we were taught. It's not like we came out of the chute going, I need to do A through Z before I can. Yes. Like we come out of the chute thinking, I can do anything. We'll put our finger anywhere. We'll sit our butt down anywhere. We have no qualms about it. And I think that that's each generation is learning this faster. I think because of social media, the filtering aspect and the inauthenticity of a lot of it, the scheduled vulnerability posts, the ones that are like a mile long, and they're like, oh, let me just tell you my life story in this Instagram post. I think those opened the door for people going, oh, I can have a mental illness. Okay, that's okay. Yeah. I can be struggling with body image. And so while they felt unauthentic, they had a purpose. And social media has created an opportunity for us at any age, right? I think Sherry Chris talked about this in 2018 at the WomanUP conference, the Generation C, the connected generation. That's all of us, anybody who wants to be part of that game, because we were still in a stage of unlearning a lot of the things that we were taught we had to do in order to be you have to get a degree before you can run a business. Well, we've clearly found that's not true, but we all thought that. And so many of my peers are dragging around 6 figures in debt because they were told they had to do these things. And now they're selling real estate or running a coaching business and not even using it, right? Because they found, like Cathy saying at the beginning, like when you find your center, like your purpose flows right out of you. The second you're in that space, it's like, what are you doing here in these 4 walls? Like, get out, girl. Like, go out there and test out the waters. And Cathy, I know you've read this book because I heard you talk about it on, I think maybe it was a wisdom session in the WomanUP community, but the heroine's journey.
Yeah.
Right.
It's crazy.
I mean, that book. So I have the funnest story about that book. So when I graduated high school, my AP teacher was a hoot. She was like a cross between Grace and Frankie, the Netflix show.
Yeah.
So she had a classy hippie look to her, but wild hair. And Heroine's Journey came out that year. And she was like, you have to read this book this summer. And so I remember reading this book and thinking, wow, women think that way? Because I've never had an experience in business. And I never really thought about the seed it planted, because I never thought that I couldn't do something when I was going through the ranks. I mean, I had men say, oh, you can't ask for that. And I'm like, well, why not? Like, I know they did. Or you can't make that much because the men don't make that much. Well, that's their fault, but it's because of that book. And so I also think that the access to us sharing what books inspired us and shifted us and cracked us open. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the heroine's journey, because I think that a lot of what we're talking about is that whole daughter, father's daughter.
Yes,
syndrome.
being a good girl, right?
Yeah.
The way that we defined good girl, and we wanted to be good because good meant we'd be accepted. And then after we were accepted, I lived my whole life thinking, once I get in, I'll do what I want, right? But once I got in, I just kept doing what it kept to be getting in and following the rules. But what blew me away about the heroine's journey, because I read the hero's journey, and it's like, oh yeah, I bow to him, bow to Joseph Campbell. And I read, that he was actually 37 years being a teacher in a women's college. So he retired as a professor in a women's college. And so he credits learning everything. But then I read Maureen Murdoch and Jean Houston's reply to them. And when they asked him, what about the women? And he said, oh, you guys are already at where we need to be. And then the whole world said, sure. And I'm sitting there going, that's just the beginning of the story.
That's right.
So Maureen Murdoch, in her heroine's journey, she points out to all the little things that we've done to fit into a world that was built by the patriarchal. And to have Joseph Campbell reply to them, well, you guys are already good little girls. You're doing exactly what you need to be. We need to be more like you. It just means, just for me, it felt like just keep dusting the tabletops and keeping the coffee fresh, and we'll all get along just fine.
Yes.
And so I went beyond that, and I read some books by Kasha Eubanks, and she's got some powerful books on why are we still so quiet. And so when I did my TED Talk, it came as part of my personal evolution, where I had this, I'll say it here and you can interpret it as you want. I woke up one morning, and I pray every morning, and I woke up and I was just like in a state of receptivity. And I got this voice inside of me that said, you do not have because you do not ask. And I responded to that voice by saying, well, people should know what I want, because I'm so busy doing the calisthenics, or I don't want to ask. I'll seem too needy, or I'll seem too weak, or I'll seem like I'm not empowered. But it hit me. You do not have because you do not ask. Why don't I ask? Well, I don't want people to think I can't do it on my own. I don't want people to think I'm in need of something. I don't want people to think I'm desperate. And then reading Kasha, she said, women don't have what they want in life because they don't ask for it. Because here's the bottom line. We don't think we deserve it unless we earn it. And we have to go through 3 times the hoops to earn it. And so therefore we're better. So we become both victim and martyr in the same breath. And then wonder why we're exhausted.
Yeah. So Deborah told me about this book. And so I started listening. I'm about a quarter of the way through it. And it just goes right back to what she says in the book, which is that it's because of like you were talking about, Deborah, it's the structure that we've been brought up in, which is male designed, right? And the dad was the one, he was the hero, right? He was the one that you were trying to gain that approval from and wanted to be most like. And the only way you can do that is to become a man, right?
Male-like, but not so much so that you give up your attractiveness. You still need to stay attractive
exactly.
and welcome. Welcome.
Yes. Yeah.
And Kasha does this thing, and I think you can relate, and I love this. She does this study. She says, okay, I've asked 500 women a question, but I gave them orders. Do not answer me until you ask me 3 questions. And so she stands in a stadium room full of women and points at one and says, why aren't you married? And she says, I am married. I've been married for 20 years. She goes, okay. So she goes to the next one. Why don't you have children? Well, I don't need children. I don't want children. And by now the room's starting to get it. Nobody has asked her 3 questions back.
Right.
She says, I stand in front of a room full of men and I say, why aren't you married? And they say, what's it to you? Why aren't you married? Who are you to ask me? Why aren't you married? That's none of your business. We are prone to please immediately. And so if you ask me a question, I have got to respond. If you ask my male counterpart a question and it doesn't fit into their schedule, they'll go silent.
Yes.
Because they're not programmed to respond. And so we have programmed ourselves. So people who ask the most questions influence outcomes. And if we're sitting in rooms feeling undeserved and invisible by not asking questions, even if we do think fast, our intricate manners of being able to create a new outcome. And that's why my mission statement is to create an alliance of courageously strong women who choose to influence outcomes and create opportunities by speaking themselves into the room.
Yes.
Even if we seem awkward, one story, one question, one day at a time. It's like,
these things are so subtle. They're so subtle. Like, I think part of what needs to happen is more of these kinds of conversations, right? Like, I remember growing up, both of my parents said, you could do or become whatever you want. I mean, that's what I was told time and time and time again. And yet, I think there was an expectation that I do certain things in a certain order. And certainly not because of anything that they said, but it's all those little things that create that sort of self-imposed expectation, right? That get us to exactly what you're talking about, and checking off those boxes and being the good girl and pleasing and not disappointing and
not bringing unnecessary attention to yourself. So
correct.
Yes.
Well, Linda Babcock wrote the book Women Don't Ask. I don't know if either of you have read that yet.
No,
but there's something inside that book that actually kind of, there's a red thread even all the way back to Cassandra. And have you read Cassandra Speaks by Elizabeth Lesser? Both of those books are kind of around this topic, right? Around the books we've been told to read, the top 100 books at any large, educational institution. 98% of them are written by men. Their topics are war or sports analogies, and that's how those are the books we consumed. But Linda talks about, like, women don't ask because from a tiny age, we're taught to ask in order to act. Like, you have to ask for a snack. You have to ask to go out on a date. You have to ask to go to the prom. You have to be asked to get married. Now, again, these are shifting in the next generation. Like, we had the Sadie Hawkins dance when I was in high school, which is, the one time where the girl was allowed to ask the boy. I'm guessing those don't even exist anymore because it's, things are different. Now they have these whole like promposals and, they're doing videos to ask each other to the prom. But my point is that she talks about how from a wee lassie, we're taught that in order to take that step, in order to have that thing, we have to ask. We have to be asked. We have to be invited. Would you like this? As opposed to when we say, I'm hungry, can I have that? It's like, well, you just ate, or there's a reason why you can't have what it is that you seek. So until the reason we don't ask for things is because we've been taught, let me tell you when it's time. I will tell you when I'm ready to get married by giving you this ring. I will tell you I want to go on a date by coming to you. And so they wait to be asked, right? This idea of women wait to be asked. And these conversations, and that happens on the WomanUP stage every time. Every Friday, on the show, someone in this chat stream, someone sitting in a chair is like, I never thought about it. My whole life, I have been waiting to be asked. I need to shift that. And so I think that once we start to unlearn that, and then we have to pass it on, right? We can't keep it to ourselves. We have to talk about the freedom that exists on the other side of asking. It's actually not that scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of it, and especially one thing that you said, Deborah, when you were saying how I think somebody else was always trying to manage the outcome for our life. I think that there was this perception, I love you, you're a little weaker. And so let me help you get what it is I think that you need, because I'm going to take care of the outcome. And whether that be, and I even think that the response Joseph Campbell had for Maureen Murdoch was a little bit like that. Oh no, we've got that handled, dearie. We've got that handled. And so there was that you can be you under the context of me over structuring whatever needs to be happening.
And that's the glass ceiling, right?
It's a glass ceiling, and it was initiated in love. And so because part of the good girl is not wanting to be inappropriate, at least I can speak that for me, that I didn't want to, what was that, look into be ungrateful for what people were doing for me. So then I was trained to be grateful for that. So it's very interesting, because ever since I started becoming a better asker, I look at women and say, well, did you ask them why? Why did they say that?
Yeah.
Well,
tell me more. Yeah.
And she goes, well, and whether it be in workplace or anything, I mean, the simple question is, well, what's behind that statement? Can you be a little clearer as to why we're going in that direction? I don't quite understand what you're getting at. Can you re-clarify that for me? And quite often, a woman courageous enough to speak that question into a room with, and even in my boardroom, 3 women, 12 men. Okay, could we have some clarity around this direction, this new promotion, where everybody else is asleep or looking at their phones, right? So it's like it wakes people up when you have the courage to ask a question to what we used to just kind of nod to, thinking somebody other than us had a better answer.
Yes.
That's better for everybody.
Yeah.
And
because there's some sort of validation in those rooms that we're seeking. And if we say the wrong thing and lose some social capital, that we might not be invited to that table next time. And so that the good girls as rear.
But isn't it funny that we can just go get another table?
Yeah.
Let's just go get another table.
And we know that now. We know that now. That was something that, even though it seems so, well, duh, of course we can. 20 years ago, it wasn't as easy as it is today.
No.
And part of it is the internet and the access to, I can build a website in 20 freaking minutes and put my pottery out there or my consulting services. I can provide for myself and my family without a man in between that. I can get my news from where I want to get it. I don't have to turn on the news at night at an exact time and have the news that's spoon-fed to me through, let's be real, at the top, it's a white dude who's filtering all of that news, which, by the way, is usually awful. It's death and destruction and or angst around the sports team that lost. It's rarely good news. Right. There,
it's like access.
Yes.
It's access. And bringing it back to WomanUP, I also think that what you and Sarah and Leslie have created in WomanUP is an environment that allows women to be free to trial, asking, and to trial being vulnerable and, putting yourself out there so that, when you are at the board table with 3 other women and 12 men, maybe it's a little easier to step up and speak your voice or ask the question, so.
And the more that we can do that to validate, I mean, I did watch a YouTube with Maureen Murdoch the other day, and a young woman was interviewing her during COVID. And she said, what you all need to do that we started doing, but it's now your turn. We need to validate each other's voice. And and so as we validate it, even to come up to say, even if it's something, it's not necessarily a course correction, but to validate that you had the courage to stand up and present your ideas, your
Right.
product or your services.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. That
Yep.
meant the world to me. And so when we validate that, that's a lot of it. So it's not just leading by example, but it's that mentoring and coaching. I follow the Utah State Women's College also on there. They do a lot of women's leadership development. And they were talking about how personal relationships within business and for women is the next step. So whether it's mentoring, coaching, friending, pulling up beside somebody, that is. So this whole college is taking on how do we develop more human development pieces for women within there, because the good old boys have been golfing for centuries. Women are busy. They're coming in, they're dropping off their kids, they're coming into work. They don't have a golf cart and the golf in the back of their trunk. They have baby wipes, or they have the soccer schedule, or they have plans for their next stop. And so we need to make and I don't want to go golfing with everybody. I need to make
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
I want to make my relationships in the boardroom count. I want to do that. And so when we are that for each other, when we validate, that was good. I'm glad you brought that point up. I'm glad we're moving forward on this.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Good.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Deborah.
No, I was just going to say that's such a great reminder, and highlighting that. Like, I want to make sure everyone heard that. Like, that is part of our responsibility to each other. Right.
Yes.
And like in 2018, I did this talk around empowering your lioness pride. And because there was so much angst, this was pre-COVID, and everybody was exhausted. We were like, the pendulum had swung so far. Everyone was doing everything. And I was talking about this idea of we can honor each other, even if we don't agree with each other.
Yes.
Like, I don't have to support someone whose goals are out of alignment with my values. I can honor her silently. I don't have to say, I don't like that. Even if I don't like it, I don't have to do that. And right now, I think we're in a time where it's like, let's focus on the validation. I love the idea of a simple action, Cathy, right? Like validating, repeating what she said and giving a validation, a celebration, framing that one more time for everyone around the table that it was her idea and it was brilliant. Like, that is a beautiful idea. I love that.
And Deborah, I'm going to ask that we take that challenge just one step further. And also, when we receive validation, when we receive public accolades, when somebody comes up and says, you did great, that we don't diminish it with a yeah, but. And I didn't do as much as I wanted to. I mean, it took everything for me to not diminish my own capacity in public, thinking that sense of humility was somehow more socially acceptable. So if I really, not only do we validate freely, but that we receive openly and without the yeah, but, without the I could have done better, without the self-defamation, because that in and of itself mirrored back to the individual is the way we want them to. Do you know how many women start off their speech by saying, thank you all for being here, as if we're thanking them before we give them anything? We're in this to win-win. Or how many people over apologize? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. Oh, my hair is not right. Oh, this isn't what I had planned. So we enter into a room in a diminished capacity and wondering why we don't step up. So we need to also mirror back receiving the grace of somebody else's kindness and generosity and receiving it openly, because that will mirror back how we can stop people from apologizing or overthanking people for being part of a community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing
So
that I
true.
started doing earlier, well, so the last couple of years, I've been slowly moving towards living by the moon as opposed to the month.
Yeah.
Right. Like January 1st isn't the start. The first new moon of the year is my start. And I kind of flow with that every 28 days. And it's been wonderful. It's been different. Right. It's like, it's different. Like, even how I read social media feels a little awkward at times, but there is when we share what it is that we're doing that's different, it allows people to step into the light and try something different. right? When,
yes,
and even something as simple as, the art of saying no, and only saying yes to things that are holy hell yeses, like that's very hard for a lot of women, a lot of humans, but a lot of women. We hear that over and over in the WomanUP community. And one of the things that we hear over and over again, not only at the conferences and the retreats and the meetups that are in person, but in emails and inside the chats, is hearing someone else say no sounded so awkward at first. And then when I tried it, it made it a little easier and less awkward. And then I did it again and I did it again. And I canceled that appointment on my schedule that I didn't need to be at. That was a people pleasing say yes. So I think that we're kind of hitting the same concepts over and over again in our conversation, right? It's like, once we learn something, we pass it on. We shine a light on it and say, this really worked for me. And that's what a lot of the women on the stage do, right? They're opening their hearts, they're cracking it open, and they're saying, they're letting their wisdom spill out. And then they're going onto the larger stages and doing that. They're going into the larger tables and saying, scooch over, I'm bringing my chair in. I'm not waiting to be invited to be at this table because I know I'm worthy. I've got the applause when I made my statements. I had the people come up afterwards and ask me for my number. So I know what I said mattered to the people that it was meant for. I think that it's just feeling that, right? It's once you feel it, it's kind of, you want it a little bit more. Ooh,
it gives you the energy and the confidence.
Ooh. Yeah. So good.
So I have a two-part question. And that is, the first part is really, so we're practicing, right? We're practicing, we're leading by example. We're starting to sort of shift the thinking and the dynamic for women. What is the next step for men? What is their role in all this? How can the men in our lives also evolve with us instead of being siloed, right? And second part of the question is, how do we impart this to the men we're bringing up, the boys that we're raising?
I love that question, because into that fullness of life, I believe that if I was to agree that nothing is really wrong with me, the masculine side within me that has been developed is now completely married with the feminine in me that has woken up to who she truly is. So as I feel that sense of fullness within myself, and that's what I bring to my dinner table, to the boardrooms, dare I say, to my bedroom. It's that part of me, that fullness, that alive part of me is not afraid or intimidated. I'm neither impressed nor intimidated by either side. And as that, I talk to my sons head on, and I let them know the chivalry isn't dead. If anything, it's reawakened and redefined itself as part of the powerful woman. That, if you see a woman who needs your help at a party because she overserved herself, then you're her ally. You don't stand by. You are not, because that woman is physically incapable of handling things that she may or may. So be an ally. Be the physically stronger person that you can be at that time. Acknowledge that, welcome that in, and at the same time ask permission, because everything is that way. So there is that ebb and flow, that seeing life on life's terms. And this doesn't have to be sexual. For me, I am heterosexual, so my partner is a man, but I do believe that true partnerships are formed when the individual themselves is in alignment with themselves. And I know that I have a good friend of mine, Trevor Baum, who started a movement called Man Uncivilized, or Uncivilized Man. And I love it because he realizes that a lot of men have shrunken into a lesser version of themselves out of their level of fear. So you think how the cloud of fear has diminished human capacity so much that we need to be tuned up to who we are within ourselves. So that's kind of a big thing. And I said something earlier that I really think is important, is that women, I had to get away from my victim story. right? Because my victim and my martyr were very closely aligned. And, you just scratch me one wrong way and weapons fly. And so I needed to soften up the victim martyr a little bit. And I needed to realize, I've been through hell, and I wouldn't have chosen that. I won't choose it for my daughter. And boy, am I happy I have a daughter and a granddaughter too. I wouldn't choose that for my daughter, but I understand now that being a woman does not mean anymore what Helen Gurley Brown, being a man light, and and that the very best part of me can come out. And I can hope and pray that that's an invitation for everybody to kind of reunite on the best part of me. My partner now, he's a great man, and he loves the questions I ask him. It's like, let's just stop. What are we doing here? And the way that I share my feelings has given him opportunities to share where he's coming from too. So
yes,
because they're having to learn a way of being as well. Sarah Jenks, I don't know if any of you follow her on Instagram or Facebook, but her and her husband, he actually just started a program. I feel like it's called Holy Man. I'm not sure, but she kind of broke out of the kind of conservative space. She was a coach in church. There's a lot of people who've had their awakenings around that, so we don't need to dig into that. But she was having the same issues with her husband. It was like, I feel like I'm leaving him in the dust, right? Like because he's like, who you are not the woman I married, and change is one thing, but when you're going from every Sunday you're doing these things to all of a sudden you're like me, you're lighting a candle on the full moon and howling a little, it's like, what the heck happened? But Andrew as well is very curious about that. He's he's leaning into it. And so just like in the 80s where they were telling women who wanted to climb the ladder, like, you either need to be single or have a man who's going to support you, you need that still. I mean, it's always our partners are a big piece of that. And also falling in love with and chasing your girlfriends, like your sisterhood, because our partners, our romantic partner, isn't always going to be the person who's going to be super supportive of all of those things, every change in every season. And so having a sisterhood that you can say, oh my God, I read this amazing book about whatever, it could be, from onboarding to orgasms, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you want to talk about it in your way. Having that group of women is so important. Pam Blair put out a reel earlier this week. I know that you saw it for sure, Christine, because you commented on it, but she was just kind of sharing like her story of coming to WomanUP and how, in 2019, she was like, gosh, this thing, she just wasn't fitting. Like, she just felt like the pieces weren't fitting. And she decided that she was going to pay attention to who she surrounded herself with. And she came to WomanUP. I met her through Stephanie Chumbley. And it was like, oh, she's got this beautiful story and yoga bug, and she's into yoga, and oh my gosh, she's going to love Molly and Christine. Like, this is going to be a great place for her. Invited her, and her whole life shifted because
it really has.
She was brave in her own braveness to step up and say, I need a change. Like, the people in my life are not lifting me up anymore, and it's okay. And as women, we've been taught to collect people, to never let them go, because the more friends we have, the better person we are, the more credits we're going to get at pearly gates. But it's like the releasing of people and places and products that no longer serves us. I think that's something that as we get older, we're like, oh yeah, it's time to release, time to purge, and it doesn't
for sure
bad.
And getting back to what you were saying about, having your sisterhood, I think it's actually unfair to expect that your spouse can serve that purpose for you, no matter what, because your spouse, and this is a whole other topic, but I think when you choose a spouse, same sex or not, they can't be everything to you. It's just not a fair expectation to put on any human. So that makes that sisterhood so much more important. And I know, Deborah, you know that, and you probably do too, Cathy, the different love languages. I think it's 4 or 5 love languages. Well, my husband, Greg, and I have, it's 5. He's like the what is it? The doer, like this, do things for you. And I'm much more I need the validation and the affection. Right. And so we get into these things like every 6 months or so. And we just had this conversation this morning where we will just like be going and like, we're an amazing team together and we can get shit done and we're supportive of each other. And then I get like lacking. I'm like, well, I haven't heard you say I love you or I appreciate you or thanks for doing all the things that you do. And I'm always feel like I'm the one like initiating the hugs and stuff, And meanwhile, he's feeling great because he's like, she's talking my love language to me, she's doing all these wonderful things. And he's feeling great because he's like, I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing all these great things for the marriage and the family and all this stuff. Right. And I had to stop and say, we got to talk about this. The point I'm making is part of that is not accusing the other of not loving or not providing or not doing or being. It's more what you talk about, Cathy, which is we need to stop and sort of reevaluate what's going on. Something's not working for me. What's going on? Like ask the questions. And I think when you come at it from a place of curiosity and wanting to understand, the other person isn't on the defensive, is much more open to having the conversation, and you end up in the right place. And that is the exact thing that happened this morning, right? It was like, oh, I didn't realize. Oh yeah, like we had this great, like, ended up in a really good place. Like you just have to, that's part of, I think, this evolution for men, I think, is, us sort of leading that open, vulnerable, curious conversation.
So good.
And I love the idea that it's an invitation and not an ultimatum. Right. Yeah. I mean, yes. I lived under the guys, and it was, I was born in the 50s. And so if you love me, you do this. Right. So that means you're not doing it. So you don't love me. So now I need to make a whole other set of conditions to live my life by. And all of it is because we scared ourselves into this thinking that isn't real. It isn't true, but it feels real, right? There are things that happen because we have a tendency. For me, I have so many thoughts and scenario thinking that things can feel real without being true in a second. And somebody could have already driven off, gone to another thing, and I'm making up a story. And being conscious of this has led me into this idea that we need to have a conversation. Now, the funny part is, and I'll say this real quick, I learned the hard way in business and in home and everywhere, that when I have expectations that aren't being met, it's most likely because I have an agreement that hasn't been made. And so I have to dial it back. Yep. Do we have an agreement? Was our agreement to meet here at the top of the hour? Yes. Okay. So I'm feeling a little lost. I'm sorry, I had to go to the grocery store for your milk. Oh, okay, I understand. But again, we have to, I believe that expectations are just agreements that haven't been discussed. And so when we can, so it's a beautiful thing. So it's all back to and communication is masculine in the verbal form. Curiosity is about receiving. So that's feminine. I mean, if you just take the whole thing of when you're in a receiving mode, you're in a feminine aspect. When you're in a projectile mode, when you're in a doing mode, you're in a masculine aspect. And the idea that we have the tendency of doing both is just our human nature. And whether we're fully human, we're fully human in all of our escapades. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. I'm sorry, Deborah, I cut you off with something.
No, I'm going to give you a tip. There's an app called Love Nudge, Christine. It's based on the love languages, and it shoots you each texts about like, hey, like little reminders of
no.
Yeah. I mean, there's an app for anything, right? and I remember Valerie Alexander had a kind of a happy bot company for a while that it didn't, I think that she shuttered the doors, but Love Nudge is great for that. You get little texts.
I am totally downloading that. Totally.
Yeah. I mean,
can I just tell you go ahead.
Go. No, please. Yes.
I was just going to say, can I just tell you a quick story that led up to this whole thing this morning? So you guys familiar with the Star Wars? I have an 11-year-old, so we binge watch it all the time. And right. So there's that,
Same.
I think it's in the second one, right? There's that scene when Han is going to get put in ice and she says, "I love you." And he says, "I know." Are you familiar with that line?
Oh yeah.
It's like,
No.
right.
Oh yeah. That's an Empire Strikes Back. I hate it when he says that.
Yes. So yesterday, Greg must have like known, right? I'm like, because I'm brewing, right? And he sends me a text and he's like, "Hey, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you're doing for this, and this, and how much I love you." And I was like, up at this point already, and I go, "Thanks." I texted him just thanks. And that's what led to the conversation this morning. He's like, "Can we talk about the elephant in the room?" And I said, what are you talking about? He said, "Well, you might as well have said, 'I know.'" And, instead of thanks, he's like, "You might as well just said, 'I know,' like Han Solo did." And of course I laughed, and that's what sort of broke the ice. But yeah, oh my God. You
It's
guys,
true,
it
though.
is like 10 of 10 your time. We've been on for 50 minutes. We need to wrap up, but I could stay on forever. I have 2 questions. One for you, Deborah. Before we wrap, can you just like this is an amazing example, right? Can you talk a little bit more about, or give us some examples of women who have really risen up as a result of the WomanUP experience?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Me.
So yes, Cathy, Kama Burton. She went through the whole process right in front of all of us, going through the taking the broker's exam, failing the broker's exam, sharing that she failed the broker's exam, saying she's not giving up, passing it, celebrating. Last year, actually, at the conference in Huntington Beach, we celebrated her 2 years at CMB Realty Services. So she's a great example. Sabrina Brown. Sabrina she's all over in her hot pink now. But, if you look back 5, 6, 7 years ago, she was not living her life out loud. And she took the WomanUP stage. She shared her story, and like the rocket launcher happened. And, she's the president of California's Women's Council of Realtors this year. I mean, she is taken names along the way, right? And she's bringing up a whole generation of women behind her who didn't see the diversity inside Women's Council. And she's like, "Hey, I walk into the WomanUP room and it's super diverse. Shades, shapes, sizes, you name it. Everyone's in that room. Women's Council can be the same." She's a great example. Pam Blair, we already talked about her, all the things that she's done. Jackie Soto is a great example. She's, she started a brokerage, merged in another brokerage. She's been balancing the health concerns of her partner, building a massive empire, opening escrow companies. I mean, she now has a security, not a security. She now has a beautiful network of mentors that she can tap into at any moment, right? Because she's in her 30s. She's starting out in her journey. Carol Farrar is a great example. She built her brokerage up, and then she had her first child, and she was like, "Hey, I need to shift. How do I shift?" So she found mentors inside the community that worked with their partners and were raising kids, and now has this beautiful, farmette in the city, and shares her experience left and right. Lisa Dunn and Lori Namazi, they have tried on lots of different activities, businesses, personas. They really have found their voice in the industry. And I have to say, you, Christine, you are a great example of a WomanUP success story. I mean, when we met, you were working in a corporate gig, and it wasn't that you were unhappy. It's just you were not living your potential out loud and on purpose. Like you simply just weren't. You were kind of weaving it in and feeling like, okay, well, this is enough for now. And now look at you. My gosh.
I know.
That's amazing.
That's a hell yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
So Cathy, I have 2 more questions for you before we wrap. One is, of everything we talked about in the last hour, what are the 3 most important things you want people to take away from the conversation?
That's a good question. to be seen, heard, and let your value be recognized, to do that same acknowledgement for others, and to be in a position where you can become genuinely compassionate with the person in front of you while being completely engaged with the world around you. That we're living in a world of both and. We are. It's not, one of the most beautiful things is like, how can I be both present to the individual and conscious of the world we're living in? And in doing so, that we serve people at a higher level just through our presence. It doesn't even have to be through our advice, but just being that, showing up authentically like that, and giving people the same respect that you're willing to receive. Not that you demand, but you're willing. A lot of times we're the filter. We're the glass ceiling in our own life. So that's exactly that. And lastly, the movie that really shook me up this year was Woman Talking. And I say that because you never know what's going to happen when a room full of open-minded women sit down and see what could be the answer for what we're going through right now. And if you haven't seen that movie, please watch it with just an open mind and an open heart on what can happen when we don't have to be the same. Women can be the model for that. We don't have to be the same to move towards the solution. So nice. Love that.
And then the last question I have for you is, finish this sentence. Know, like, trust is.
Oh, it's a secret sauce. It's what flourishes in an economy of trust. That's how we have to do it. And that's where we are.
Beautiful.
We're in it.
Cathy, where can people find you?
Oh, well, you can find me once you learn how to spell my last name, which is Scharetg, and it's Cathy with a C. I'm at CathyScharetg.com. I will be relaunching that website. I'm also at Intero Real Estate in San Francisco. And so I am going to be here. I'm in San Francisco, and you can look me up there. And that, once you're a realtor, you're like on everything. You're not really a realtor if you can't be found on the internet. And lastly, but most importantly, is you can find me at WomanUP on June 12th through the 14th. I'm so excited to be there and be a wave maker there. So that'll be amazing.
Deborah, can people still register and buy tickets?
Yes. So a couple of things on that. Go to IamWomanUp.com to get your ticket. There are also still, as of last night, we checked, there are still some of the rooms available. Our block was released back into the public feed. So the rooms that we had reserved for our community, once they're gone, that rate that they gave us is gone. So hop off the fence, make yourself a priority, invest in yourself. It really is so delicious when we're all together, and we have such a beautiful tapestry woven this year of personal development, business planning and development, and me time. I think the art of being is experiencing a renaissance, right? We're realizing that being doesn't mean lazy or being passive. It actually does take focus and grit to just be.
Yeah.
And so join us there. It's right across the street from Oceanside Beach and Pier. The walking tours are gorgeous. We've got yoga in the morning, a walk with the CAR leadership as well. It really culminates into the most balanced content that I believe we have had, right? It has a little bit of everything, including the lunch and learn that Christine and Carrie are going to be part of, which is around planning putting together your marketing plan. And so come on and hang out with us. The three of us would love to see you there.
Yes, absolutely. IamWomanUp.com. Hopefully we'll see everybody there. Till then, thanks for joining us. If you're listening to or watching the replay, leave us a comment. Let us know. If you're listening to the podcast, leave us a 5-star review, share it with your friends, and have a wonderful day. It's great to see you both, and we'll see everyone else next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.